Imagine, if you will, spending 20 solid years hiding behind a literal physical black curtain hanging in your living room.
Wow. Yeah, that is a really striking image to start with.
I mean, you're sitting in this tiny, dark, sectioned off square of a shared apartment, and you're spending your days writing an epic story about an alchemist.
Right. A man who holds the mystical power to turn heavy, useless lead into brilliant gold.
Exactly. And yet, while you're writing about this ultimate transformation, your own actual life is completely stagnant. You are
Which
paralyzed.
is, well, it's tragically ironic, isn't it?
Completely. And today we are looking at the life of a man who realized that the hardest thing a human being will ever translate, it isn't a foreign language, it's
It
themselves.
really is. And that opening image, it perfectly encapsulates the immense invisible walls we all build. I mean, when you hear the word translation, your brain probably defaults to a very mechanical process.
Right, like using a dictionary.
Yeah, exactly. You take an English word, you slide a Spanish or Japanese word into its place, and you just move on. We treat it like a currency exchange.
Like it's just a one-to-one swap?
Right. But what happens when the thing you are trying to translate doesn't have a direct equivalent?
Yeah.
How do you translate the generational struggle of an entire community into the rigid, uncompromising language of the American legal system?
Oh, wow. That is a massive question.
Or, even on a much more intimate level, how do you translate your own crippling anxiety
Yeah.
into a piece of art that someone else can actually understand and feel?
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are entirely reframing this concept of translation for you listening. We're going to explore how translation is actually the fundamental underlying act of simply being human.
Right, it's happening all the time.
Every single time, like when you try to explain a complicated feeling to a friend or just summarize a messy day at work, you are performing an act of translation. You're taking the raw data of your existence and trying to make it legible.
Makes it so someone else can read it. Yeah.
And the sources we have stacked up for you today explore this exact phenomenon through the lens of one incredibly complex life.
We are working from an immensely rich source stack today, centering on the life and mind of Manuel del Valle y Colón. Specifically, we're anchoring our exploration around his April 2026 release, Omnibus Poetry LIX-translation.
But this isn't just a literary review, right?
Oh, no, not at all. The materials provided include a blend of historical biography, extensive records of his civil rights and legal achievements, some deeply philosophical poetic vignettes from the book, and even an anonymous AI-generated tribute to his legacy.
It's essentially an archive of a person who spent his entire existence acting as a bridge between incompatible worlds.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Who exactly is Manuel del Valle y Colón? Let's get the raw facts on the table before we start dissecting all the philosophy.
Sure. So, born in October 1948, Manuel del Valle Colón is a New Yorkan.
And just for those who might not be familiar with the term, New Yorkan is a portmanteau of New York and Puerto Rican, right?
Exactly. It refers to the members and culture of the Puerto Rican diaspora located in or around New York City. His parents were from Hatillo and Moca, Puerto Rico, but Manuel was born in East Harlem.
Okay, so he's a city kid.
Very much so. He grew up in the public housing projects of New York City, specifically the Carver Houses and the Douglas projects. But from those beginnings, he goes on to walk the halls of Princeton University and Yale Law School.
Which is an incredible trajectory.
It is. And then he stands as a litigator before the United States Supreme Court, serves as a chief administrative law judge, and, as if that wasn't enough, becomes a wildly prolific writer, authoring over 60 volumes of poetry.
I mean, the sheer volume of that output is hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
60 volumes. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
It's a staggering amount of work.
But what really stood out to me in these sources is a specific phrase he uses to describe his approach to life. He says he chose to live in the gray shadows of possibility.
Yes, the gray shadows.
He actively rejected the fixed black and white outcomes that society tried to hand him. So as we walk through his life today, from East Harlem to the Supreme Court to his poetry, I want you listening to keep this question in your head. How are you translating the raw material of your own life?
That's the core question, definitely. And to understand the massive scale of the translations he pulled off later in life, we have to look at the environment that first shaped his vocabulary.
Right, the early days.
Yeah, we were talking about New York City in the 1950s and 60s. He's attending PS 72 and PS 179. This is an era where the city is deeply segregated.
So the structural challenges for a young Puerto Rican boy in public housing are just immense.
Immense. The system is not designed to elevate him. It is actively designed to contain him.
But he breaks out of that containment early. Like in 1962, he gets into Brooklyn Technical High School. And Brooklyn Tech is not just any high school.
No, it's legendary.
It is one of the most elite, specialized public schools in the entire country. You don't just wander in. You have to test into it against thousands of other kids.
Right. It's highly competitive.
He graduates in 1966, and the sources give us this incredible, tangible artifact from that time, his high school yearbook. And looking at what his classmates wrote, I mean, it's not normal high school stuff.
Not at all. High school yearbooks are usually filled with, superficial well wishes, have a great summer, that kind of thing. But his peers are writing things like, to an amateur historian, and king is quotes.
Which is pretty intense for a teenager.
It gets more intense. Another classmate literally writes, to the power behind the throne.
Wow.
And there's one signature from a student named Harry Laracuente that reads, may you be involved in a historical cataclysmic occurrence.
I mean, who writes that to a 17-year-old? It sounds like a prophecy from a fantasy novel.
It really does.
But it shows that even at 17, he was projecting this intense intellectual gravity. And there's a specific word that keeps popping up in these yearbook signatures that seems to be the catalyst for everything that comes next. The word is aspera.
Yes, aspera is absolutely crucial to his story. While he was tackling the intense curriculum at Brooklyn Tech, he was also deeply involved in the Aspera clubs.
What exactly was Aspera at that time?
Aspera was, and still is, actually, an organization dedicated to empowering Puerto Rican youth through education and leadership development. And he didn't just join the club, he became the Issues and Actions chairman of the Aspera Clubs Federation.
And the people training him in this club are absolute heavy hitters. We're talking about Antonia Pantoja, who literally founded Aspera and became a monumental figure in education.
Right, a true pioneer.
He's working with Yolanda Sanchez from the East Harlem Tenants Council. He is being mentored by the absolute architects of the Puerto Rican civil rights movement.
And this is where the engine of his life's work really turns on. He is absorbing all this organizing strategy, all this cultural history, and he is looking ahead to the elite academic spaces he's about to enter.
Because he's about to make a huge jump.
Yeah, he gets selected for a postgraduate year at the Yale Transitional Year Program in 1966, and then enters Wesleyan University in the fall of 1967.
Okay, stop right there. Because I read the unpublished paper by Jose M. de Jesus detailing Manuel's time at Wesleyan, and I genuinely could not believe the timeline.
It's pretty unbelievable.
This is a freshman, an 18 or 19-year-old kid, and according to the sources, he puts together a proposal, gets faculty support, and acquires a major grant from the Ford Foundation to build a Latino community on campus.
As a freshman.
As a freshman, he is personally recruiting students, bringing in a record 10 Latino men into his class. He and the administration start the Eugenio Maria de Hostos Wesleyan Club. I have to push back on this. This isn't just being a good student. It sounds like he was acting as a one-man admissions department, a diversity officer, and a community organizer. It's like trying to write the operating system for a computer while you're still trying to learn how to type. How does a teenager even carry that burden?
That's a really good analogy. Think about it like a software engineer trying to connect to entirely incompatible systems. Let's use an API as an analogy.
Okay, an application programming interface.
Exactly. An API allows two different pieces of software to talk to each other. When Manuel gets to Wesleyan in the late 60s, the university has zero infrastructure to process the data of the Latino experience.
The system just isn't built for it.
Right. The university speaks one language, Manuel's community speaks another. So Manuel couldn't just show up and be a student. He had to personally write the API.
Oh, I see.
He had to translate his community's existence into grant proposals, into club charters, into recruitment metrics. That was the specific language the university required to allocate resources in space.
He had to make his culture legible to the institution.
Exactly. He bore the burden because if he didn't write the code, the connection simply wouldn't happen. And then, and this is the craziest part, having built this entire infrastructure at Wesleyan, he leaves.
What? He just leaves.
In the summer of 1969, he transfers to Princeton University.
Which is wild. He builds the bridge, hands over the toll booth, and basically says, all right, time to go build another one in the Ivy League.
He saw greater resources at Princeton, so he pivoted. And he immediately runs the exact same playbook.
Of course he does.
He founds the Latino organization on campus. He secures university approval to institute one of the very first seminars in the Ivy League dedicated to the history and politics of Puerto Rico.
Wait, he instituted the seminar as an undergrad?
Yes. And because the materials for such a class didn't readily exist in Princeton's library, he uses foundation grants to study at the University of Puerto Rico during the summer just so he can compile the syllabus himself.
He's literally writing the textbook for his own existence in the Ivy League.
He really is.
And what I find so compelling is how this academic translation, building clubs, writing syllabi, it isn't just an intellectual exercise for him. It becomes the literal blueprint for his legal career. It is a direct pivot.
It is a seamless transition into what we can view as the ultimate arena of translation law. He wins a John Hay Whitney Fellowship and attends Yale Law School from 1971 to 1974.
And the historical context of his class at Yale is just staggering.
It's a who's who of legal mind.
Right. He is graduating alongside people like Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Gunier. And I want to be super clear here, regardless of the wildly different political ideologies those figures represent, and we aren't evaluating those politics here, just acknowledging the sheer density of influence in that room, it was a crucible.
Oh, absolutely a crucible.
He was being forged in an environment surrounded by minds that would go on to shape American jurisprudence for decades.
Right. It's the heavyweight division of legal thought. You don't walk out of that room without knowing exactly how to wield the law as a tool.
And how he wields it is a fascinating part. He graduates in 1974, and he doesn't take the easy route into corporate law. He immediately joins the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, or PRLDEF.
And he jumps right into a massive, groundbreaking case, Aspira v. Board of Education of the City of New York.
Wait, Aspira, the exact same club he was the Issues and Actions chairman of back in high school.
The very same.
That is incredible.
And this is where his ability to translate reaches a critical mass. Think about the challenge here. You have thousands of Spanish-speaking children in New York City public schools who are sitting in classrooms completely unable to understand the instruction, and they are failing.
Which everyone knows is unfair.
Right, but unfair is a feeling. Unfair doesn't force a city to spend millions of dollars changing its educational system. So the question becomes, how do you translate a social tragedy into a legal mandate?
You have to find the specific legal hook. You have to translate the pain into a violation of a statute.
And Manuel had been doing the prep work for this translation for years. Remember that seminar he built at Princeton?
The one he wrote the syllabus for, yes.
His senior thesis for that program was an extensive dive into the history of Puerto Rican student and public education from 1945 to 1969.
Oh.
While interning for Senator Jacob Javits, Manuel took a chapter of that college thesis and incorporated it into a policy memorandum. That memo then became part of a U.S. Commission on Civil Rights hearing in 1972.
I think I see where this is going.
And that research, which started as a college paper, provided the structural arguments that PRLDEE use to frame the complaint in the Aspira lawsuit.
That is insane. I want to make sure I'm following this chain reaction.
Yeah.
He translates his lived experience into a college thesis.
Right.
He translates the thesis into a senatorial policy memo.
Oh.
He translates the memo into a civil rights hearing, and then he uses the hearing to build a federal lawsuit.
Exactly. And the result of that lawsuit was a consent decree. Now, for you listening, a consent decree is incredibly powerful. It isn't just a judge saying, hey, try to do better.
It has teeth.
Serious teeth. It is a binding court-enforced settlement. Once that decree was signed, if the New York City Board of Education failed to provide bilingual education to limited English-speaking children, they would be in direct violation of a federal court order. They could be held in contempt.
So he literally forced their hand.
That took a community's need and translated it into federal law.
He locked them into the architecture of their own legal system. That is brilliant. And you can see the ripple effects of this kind of translation in the personal testimonies included in the sources.
There's some beautiful testimonies in there.
There's a deeply moving letter from a Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo that I think perfectly illustrates Manuel's impact.
Let's look at that letter because it highlights a different kind of translation, the mentoring of another mind. Dr. Ibarrondo explains his background. His parents only had a second-grade education, but they taught him critical thinking.
Which is huge.
Yeah. He had a progressive sixth-grade teacher who taught him to question everything. He essentially educated himself by reading voraciously at the local Harlem bookstores, which he affectionately called the university at the corner of Lenox Avenue.
Right, so he has all this raw intelligence and hunger, but he writes about going to a high school in Puerto Rico hoping to learn about his own heritage, only to find the curriculum was entirely colonized.
So he's completely alienated.
He learned practically nothing about Puerto Rican history while actually living on the island. But then, everything changes when he gets to Fordham University and crosses paths with Manuel, who was a professor there at the time.
Ibarrando's exact phrasing is so revealing here. He says that Manuel taught him how to, and I'm quoting here, conceptualize and articulate my knowledge about law and Puerto Rican history. He calls Manuel the bridge between my questions and my life's work.
That distinction between having knowledge and being able to articulate it is massive. Ibarrando already had the lived experience. He had the anger, the curiosity, the street-level data, but he didn't have the syntax.
He didn't have the API.
Exactly. It's like having $1 million in a currency that no bank will accept. Manuel was the exchange window. He gave Ibarrando the academic and legal vocabulary to take his internal fire and structure it into a career.
He provided the structural framework. And Manuel did this for countless people as a professor at Yale, Fordham, and New York Law School. But the most stunning piece of evidence regarding his role as a foundational translator comes from a very brief inscription included in the materials.
Oh, this part gave me chills.
It's a photograph of the inside cover of a book, specifically the memoir My Beloved World. And it's signed by the author, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
I stared at this photo for a long time. She writes directly to Manuel. The inscription says, "Manuel, you are my first role model, someone with a passion for fighting for change. Thank you for all you have done for so many and for what you continue to do."
Consider the gravity of the phrase, my first role model.
Coming from a Supreme Court justice.
Right. Before she was a prosecutor, before she was a judge, before she sat on the highest court in the land, she was likely a young student navigating the Ivy League network. They both had deep Princeton connections, actually.
That makes sense.
And she looked at Manuel del Valle Colón to understand what advocacy looked like. He translated the very concept of fighting for change into a physical example she could follow.
Which brings us to a massive, jarring pivot in this deep dive, because up until this point, we are looking at a man whose entire legacy is built on the absolute binding power of words.
Right. The law.
The law is a machine made of definitions. If a word in a contract or a statute is vague, the machine breaks down. Lawyers spend years arguing over the placement of a comma because the exactness of the language determines who goes to jail or who loses millions of dollars.
It's an environment of total precision.
And yet, after a lifetime of demanding absolute precision from language as a litigator and a judge, he dedicates the later part of his life to poetry.
Which is such a shift.
And not just any poetry. Poetry that actively explores the idea that language is fundamentally broken, that words, by their very nature, fail us.
Let's get into the book itself then. The April 2026 release, Omnibus Poetry LIX-translation. And even the title page is making a statement.
Yeah, the visual layout is striking.
It doesn't just say translation in English. It lists the word across multiple languages: Chinese, Japanese, Thai.
So what is the core thesis he is presenting here?
The dedication of the volume gives us the thesis right away. He dedicates the work to those who continually reinterpret the world through language, art, memory, and relationship, knowing that every act of understanding both reveals and distorts reality.
Reveals and distorts reality. That is a paradox. I mean, if I understand something, shouldn't my distortion of it decrease?
You would think so.
But he's saying the act of understanding causes the distortion. He anchors this entire idea on a famous old Italian proverb, traduttore,
Translator, trader.
Trader.
Right. It's a linguistic concept that originated when scholars were trying to translate ancient Greek and Latin texts into modern Italian. They realized that it is mathematically impossible to map a text perfectly from one language to another.
Because the words just don't line up perfectly.
Exactly. The grammar, the cultural context, the slang, none of it aligns perfectly. Therefore, the argument goes, every translation is an act of treason against the original text. You have to destroy the original to rebuild it in the new language. As Manuel writes in his introduction, there is no identity here, just approximation.
I'm going to be honest, when I read that, I felt a deep wave of existential dread.
It is a heavy thought.
If every translation is a betrayal of the original thought, isn't human communication totally hopeless? Think about it. You have this profound, complex, swirling emotion inside you. The moment you try to force that feeling through your vocal cords and turn it into standard English sentences, you are betraying the feeling.
You're squishing into a box.
Exactly. The words are too small. You end up handing the other person a cheap plastic replica of the actual emotion you're experiencing. Are we just doomed to never truly be known?
That is the dark side of the proverb, yes. The idea that we are all trapped in our own isolated silos, shouting approximations at each other. But Manuel does not view this as a tragedy.
He doesn't.
No, he actually flips this concept of linguistic betrayal on its head and uses it to construct a deeply liberating philosophy. He argues that this approximation, this distortion, isn't a failure to be corrected. It is the very space where life actually occurs.
Walk me through that, because we are definitely not taught to view distortion as a good thing. We want high definition, perfect clarity in everything.
We do. We live in a society obsessed with metrics, exactness, and predictable outcomes. We want the spreadsheet to balance perfectly. But Manuel writes that a true life is spent in the gray shadows of possibility.
The gray shadows again?
Yes. He says we should live there rather than the fixed outcomes set out by a society that values predictability over anything else and abhors the shadows that give life delight.
Society abhors the shadows that give life delight. That is such a heavy, gorgeous line.
It's brilliant.
He's essentially saying that the friction, the misunderstanding, the gap between what I feel and what I can actually say, that gap isn't a glitch in the matrix. That gap is where art comes from.
Yes.
It's where grace and forgiveness live. If we could communicate perfectly, if we could read each other's minds with zero distortion, we wouldn't be human. We'd be algorithms.
Precisely. And if words are inherently betrayals, if they always fall short of capturing the rigid truth of our internal lives, Manuel asks the next logical question. How else do we translate the world?
If language fails, what tools do we have left?
Exactly. He explores this by looking at how visual artists translate reality.
Which is fascinating because an artist has no words to rely on at all. There is a poem here about an artist who is trying to draw a scene in a restaurant, but the way they are drawing it is completely unhinged from physical reality.
Let me set the scene from the poem. The artist is surrounded by people, but they aren't drawing humans. They translate the people into creatures of the night or various kinds of cats.
Which is already so surreal.
It gets weirder. They draw tables and chairs, but they elongate them until they are absurd. The physical world is entirely warped. Streets are drawn sideways. Tall buildings are depicted with farms and gardens on different floors. Dance clubs turn into buses, buses into subways, subways into airports.
So it's just total chaos.
And most noticeably, there is absolutely no color. The artist only uses black, white, and gray.
Why do that? I mean, if you are an artist sitting in a restaurant, why not draw the restaurant? If the goal of art is to translate the world, why make the translations so completely unrecognizable to anyone else?
Manuel provides a powerful psychological reason for this. The poem suggests that this artist is navigating a world filled with challenge, trauma, or profound struggle. When you are in the middle of a crisis, the world doesn't make sense. The physical facts of the room you are in, the square table, the white walls, are entirely irrelevant to your internal experience. So if the artist were to draw the table perfectly, it would be a lie. It would be an inaccurate translation of how they feel.
Oh, wow. I see it. They aren't drawing the table. They're drawing the anxiety of sitting at the table.
Exactly.
If you feel like your entire life has been turned upside down, then the only honest way to translate your reality is to draw the streets upside down. The distortion is the only way to tell the truth.
The gray shadows are the reality for that artist. And Manuel takes this exploration of artistic translation even further with another vignette. This one is about an abstract painter, and it deals with translating the concept of intimacy.
Yes, the painter who made love to a cloud. The imagery in this one is so specific and strange.
It really stands out.
It starts with a rumor circulating about the painter. He said he made love to a cloud, then he made love to the sky. And then we get into his intensely rigid creative process. He is obsessed with a perfume his lover wore when they first met wild roses.
Right.
And now he refuses to ever paint without wearing that exact wild rose perfume himself.
And pay attention to the visual rules he imposes on his studio. He, the painter, always wears a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes. He is entirely clad in black.
Yeah.
But the models he hires to paint, he mandates that they must always wear either white or gray.
So he's creating this stark contrast.
He creates a stark, absolute visual boundary between himself and the subject.
Yeah.
Furthermore, there is a strict rule of no physical contact. He keeps them at a distance.
Which is so counterintuitive. If you're an artist trying to capture the raw essence of human intimacy and passion, you'd think you would want closeness, but he isolates himself. And here's the detail that I found most bizarre.
What's that?
He asks every single model he paints the exact same question. He asks, "Are you in a relationship, and what does your lover call you?" But the text makes it explicitly clear that he does not care what the answer is. He literally ignores the words they say.
So if he doesn't care about the facts of their answer, what is he actually looking for?
He is hunting for the reaction. He knows that when you ask someone what their lover calls them, their face changes. There is a micro-expression, a specific kind of smile, a softening of the eyes, a shift in their breathing.
A physical translation of a memory.
Exactly. He doesn't want the data, he wants the resonance. And the absolute second he sees that genuine spark of intimacy flash across their face, he turns to his canvas and starts painting abstract clusters of black, white, and gray lines.
This is a masterclass in Manuel's theory of translation. The painter knows that if he tried to paint a photorealistic portrait of the model smiling, he would just be painting a biological fact. It wouldn't capture the feeling of being loved.
Right, the feeling is invisible.
So instead, he uses the model like a tuning fork. He strikes them with a question to make them vibrate at the emotional frequency of intimacy. And then he translates that invisible frequency into abstract strokes of gray and black. He bypasses language and literal representation entirely to capture the pure ghost of the emotion.
He captures the shadow, not the object. It's incredibly beautiful, but, well, not all the shadows we try to navigate are beautiful. Let's return to the image we opened the deep dive with.
The scriptwriter.
Right. Sometimes the things we are most destined to translate, or perhaps the things we are terrified of translating, are our own deep-seated anxieties.
This brings us to a deeply psychological poem about a man paralyzed by his own potential. The protagonist is a 40-year-old scriptwriter. He has spent 20 years working in the industry, and the text is brutal in its assessment. It says he has nothing to show but hopes and desires.
That is brutal.
He is currently living with his 50-year-old brother in what sounds like a cramped apartment.
And the way his anxiety manifests physically is so telling. He has hung a massive black curtain in the apartment to separate his tiny writing desk from the rest of the living space.
A literal wall.
Whenever he feels overwhelmed by the reality of his life, he draws the black curtain shut to erase all anxiety. He is translating the massive, chaotic failure of his real life into a tiny, controllable, dark box where he can pretend he is safe.
And we must look at what he is actually doing inside that dark box. For 20 years, he has been agonizing over a single script. It's a story about an alchemist, a character who possesses the knowledge to transform base substances into precious metals and metals into gems using the 5 elements.
The irony is almost painful. He is dedicating his entire adult life to writing a story about a man whose singular defining trait is the ability to enact the ultimate translation, turning lead into gold.
Right.
Yet this writer is completely incapable of transforming his own stagnant, leaden life into anything of value. He knows the theory of alchemy, but he cannot execute it on himself.
He is trapped. And what's crucial here is how he escapes. He doesn't suddenly have a personal epiphany. The translation happens through an outside force. A woman who works in the industry comes to visit.
And he tries to hide it, right?
His pride and his fear tell him to hide his work. He doesn't want to show her the unfinished manuscript. But while he steps out of the room, she sees it. She picks it up and she reads it.
Total violation of the writer's boundaries.
Complete violation, but a necessary one, because she doesn't confront him about it. Instead, without telling him she read his life's work, she begins to secretly feed him ideas.
Like Inception?
Kind of, yeah. Over time, she casually drops concepts, structural hints, and thematic elements into their conversations. And those ideas slowly find their way into his revisions. And suddenly, the script clicks. It bursts into life. His anxiety dissolves. He physically tears down the black curtain. He moves out of his brother's apartment, and his life finally begins.
So if we look at this through the lens of Manuel's philosophy, what is the mechanism here? Why couldn't he finish it himself?
Because sometimes we are fundamentally incapable of translating our own worth. We are too close to the text of our own lives. Our internal language is entirely garbled by fear, shame, and imposter syndrome.
We can't read our own code.
Exactly. In those moments of paralysis, we require what we might call translation through relationship. We need another person to look at the messy, chaotic manuscript of our lives, decipher the value that is hidden inside it, and translate it back to us in a language we can finally act upon. She was the API he needed to connect his potential to reality.
He needed a co-translator. That makes so much sense. But this concept of imposter syndrome, of being unable to read your own value, Manuel attacks this from the opposite direction as well. What happens when the outside world translates you as successful? They give you the title and the respect, but your internal translation completely rejects it.
He explores this in the Heir to the Throne poem. It is a vivid, terrifying depiction of internal misalignment. The poem describes a young man who is experiencing what he believes is a highly stressful dream. Today is his coronation day. He is the heir apparent to his grandfather's throne, and he's being prepared for the ceremony.
The details of the clothing are carrying so much weight here. He is being dressed by courtiers in this incredibly elaborate, formalized military uniform, a blue suit, a golden sash, a heavy belt, golden epaulets on his shoulders, braided cuffs that perfectly matched the collar.
That's all very ornamental.
It is a costume designed for one specific purpose: to project absolute, unquestionable authority.
But the internal reality of the young man wearing the suit is pure panic. He feels completely hollow. He realizes that in this world of royalty and power, substance doesn't matter. The only things that matter are projection, presentation, and presence.
Which is terrifying if you don't feel ready.
He knows he is inexperienced, he knows he is uncomfortable, but he's expected to translate himself into an infallible symbol of power for the audience. The pressure is so immense that he thrashes around in his bed, soaked in sweat, terrified of being exposed as a fraud.
Think about how relatable that is to anyone listening right now. Think about the last time you walked into a high-stakes job interview or a massive presentation or even a first date wearing clothes that felt like a costume.
We've all been there.
You put on the blazer or the dress and you feel like a child playing dress-up in your parents' closet. That sweat he wakes up in, that's the universal panic of realizing your internal translation, "I am a mess," does not match your external resume. I am an expert.
And Manuel delivers a masterful twist at the end of the poem. The young man wakes up from the nightmare in a cold sweat. He thinks, thank God it was just a dream. He feels a moment of profound relief. But then he looks around the room. He is not in his childhood bed. He is in the royal palace. The courtiers are waiting. The coronation is real. It is happening today.
Oh, that is devastating. He can't wake up from the responsibility.
And the poem ends with a heartbreaking admission. He wishes he could just be taken back to the simplicity of his uncle's abode, rather than having to face this complex narrative of intrigue and rebirth.
He wants to run away.
This is the core tragedy of imposter syndrome. Even when reality hands us the crown, we earn the degree, we got the promotion, we won the case, our internal fear creates a distortion where we feel like frauds. We actively prefer the safety of our old, limited translations of ourselves over the terrifying reality of our actual proven potential.
We'd rather go back to the uncle's small house or hide behind the black curtain than wear the golden epaulets. Because the curtain is safe. The curtain doesn't expect anything from us.
But staying behind the curtain means staying in isolation. And Manuel's poetry ultimately argues that translation, despite all its flaws and betrayals, is the only tool we have to break out of isolation. When we use it honestly, it can bridge the gap between two lonely souls.
Which brings us to a poem that feels like a beautifully shot indie film. The Rooftop Poem. We are out of the dark apartments and palaces, and we are up on a city rooftop.
It's a very vivid setting.
It's a communal space, strung with clotheslines everywhere, saris, dresses, pants, undergarments blowing in the wind. Two complete strangers happen to sit down on the same bench among these clotheslines.
They have never met.
Yeah.
They don't know each other's languages, histories, or traumas. But as they sit there, they both start silently wondering the exact same thing. Could this stranger be the one?
And their opening dialogue is this incredible, cautious exchange of vulnerabilities. She admits to him that when she's feeling down or overwhelmed, her coping mechanism is to eat. And he responds by admitting that when he is feeling down, his coping mechanism is to cook.
It is the perfect lock and key. It's an immediate, practical complementarity.
It's like the universe handed them the cheat codes to a perfect relationship. They start asking each other questions, slowly translating their isolated individual lives into a shared narrative. They're building a bridge.
They are.
And just as he is gathering the courage to translate his growing feelings into an actual confession of love, the sky opens up.
A sudden, violent rainstorm breaks out over the rooftop.
The absolute worst timing possible.
But the rainstorm serves a vital narrative purpose. The romantic tension is shattered by chaos. They both have to jump up, frantically running around the rooftop, yanking down the sarace and clothes from the lines to save them from being ruined.
So the mood is totally gone.
Right, in all that frantic, wet, chaotic movement, the moment completely evaporates. The confession is lost to the weather.
So why include the rain? Why build up this beautiful connection just to wash it away before it solidifies?
Because the rainstorm represents the unpredictable reality of the gray shadows. Life does not operate like a movie script. Confessions of love are rarely delivered in perfectly lit, uninterrupted moments.
Chaos always intervenes.
Always. The poem notes that fear and misunderstanding inevitably creep in when trying to connect with someone new. So how do you survive the rain? Manuel writes that the cure for this unpredictability is radical honesty. Honesty is what breaks down the barriers.
So it's about the effort, not the perfection.
Exactly. By choosing to openly translate your feelings into words, and then consistently translating those words into action steps, like helping save the clothes from the rain, you create a safety zone. Disclosing your joys and your traumas, that continuous, messy act of translation, is what builds a bond that can withstand the weather.
It's not about delivering the perfect speech. It's about showing up in the rain and doing the work together. And speaking of the joy that comes from that kind of connection, there is another piece here that completely abandons realism to translate pure, unadulterated joy. The children on panthers.
Here, Manuel blends mythological imagery with raw emotion. He paints a dreamscape where one child is joyously flying through the sky on the back of a panther, and another child is riding on the back of a tiger.
And the color palette is the exact opposite of the depressed artist in the restaurant. Everything in this world is overwhelmingly blue. The sky is blue, the land is blue, the ocean is blue.
It's a completely saturated world.
Time, space, and matter seem to completely dissolve into this single, fluid continuum filled with the smell of flowers. It is a surreal, magical translation of reality.
But the philosophical anchor of this poem is found in one specific, vital line. As the children slow their massive mounts to a walk, their eyes take in the environment around them. The text says, joy did not abide in the event, but in the sight offered.
Let's repeat that, because that is the thesis statement for this entire discussion. Joy did not abide in the event, but in the sight offered.
It's profound.
Joy is not a physical object sitting out in the world waiting for you to trip over it. Joy is not an objective fact. Joy is a translation. It is the specific mechanism of how you choose to perceive the events around you. The children are actively translating their surreal environment into a state of pure joy.
Which brings us full circle. From the academic halls of Princeton to the surreal blue skies of poetry, translation is always an act of choice. And Manuel gives us one final grounding image that ties his academic roots, his legal career, and his poetic philosophy together. The poem of the academic on the floor.
Picture a scholar. He is sitting on the floor of a room completely buried in books. They are stacked everywhere. He is meticulously trying to place these disparate texts into an order he can actually understand. He is trying to build a thesis out of chaos.
He is not just reading, he is going to war. He is using footnotes like weapons. He is taking these dusty texts and translating them into specific support for bold scholarly claims.
Oh, the parenthetical notes.
Right. He heavily relies on parenthetical notes to prove he found original documentation. And why is he doing this? Because he is actively fighting back against the historical myth-interpretations of the past. He is trying to correct the record.
He's doing exactly what Manuel did with his senior thesis that eventually became the Esper lawsuit. He is organizing history to force a change in the present. But as the scholar sits there in his laboratory of books, surrounded by all his footnotes and evidence, he comes to a profound, humbling realization. He realizes that words have a habit of serving a multitude of masters.
Words serve a multitude of masters. That line is the skeleton key to understanding Manuel del Valle Colón. Think about the trajectory we've traced today. When he was writing that policy memo for Senator Javits, those words served the master of political expediency.
Right.
When he was arguing the Aspira case, those same underlying facts served the master of legal justice. When he writes about an abstract painter smelling wild roses, words serve the master of artistic resonance.
The word itself is just a vessel. Whether you are an academic fighting historical erasure on the floor of a library, or two strangers desperately trying to connect during a rainstorm on a rooftop, or a lawyer drafting a brief that will dictate the education of thousands of children, you are constantly wrestling with words that refuse to be pinned down.
They are slippery by nature.
You are always trying to force the chaotic, multidimensional reality of human life into a two-dimensional structure that someone else can understand.
And that struggle requires a deep, abiding respect for the gray shadows. Because as the final section of his poetry notes, translation is ultimately the decision of how someone or something should be seen. It is not just a mechanical swap of vocabulary. It is an act of attention and fundamentally an act of respect.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive. When you step back and look at the sheer scope of this source material, you realize you aren't just looking at a resume. You are looking at a masterclass in how to bridge the impossible. And there is an anonymous AI tribute included in the text that I think summarizes his legacy better than we ever could.
The AI tribute is remarkably poetic itself.
Yeah.
It refers to Manuel as the poet of many tongues, defender of many truths.
That's a great line.
It describes him walking barefoot through thresholds of law and lyric, carrying scrolls of justice in one hand and the quiet fire of poems in the other.
Barefoot through thresholds.
Right. It acknowledges that he has built bridges not just between physical geographies like New York and Puerto Rico, but between entire realms of human experience, the legal and the luminous, the historical and the mythical.
The tribute says, he does not merely dwell in this world, you reimagine it, through law, through longing, through the luminous labor of truth and art. So I want to turn this directly to you, listening to this right now. Why does any of this matter to your Tuesday morning commute or your Friday afternoon meetings? Why should you care about the life of a Puerto Rican litigator poet or an Italian proverb about traitorous translators?
Because every single day, you are the chief translator of your own life.
Exactly. You are the one looking at the raw, messy data of your experiences. You are the one deciding how the chaotic, overwhelming, and occasionally joyful events of your day are recorded in the archive of your own memory. You are the one choosing which footnotes to include in your own history.
If every act of understanding is indeed both a revelation and a distortion, as Manuel suggests, then perhaps we all need to stop fighting so hard against the distortion. Perhaps the ultimate goal of life isn't to find the mathematically perfect translation of who we are.
It isn't to force ourselves into the fixed, predictable, black and white outcomes that society constantly demands of us.
Perhaps the goal is to finally be at peace with the gray shadows, to realize that the distortion itself, the weird, messy gap between the objective facts of your life and your subjective, wild, imaginative experience of them, is exactly where your unique humanity lives. It's where the delight is. It's where the art happens.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. If the goal of communication isn't perfect clarity, but rather a meaningful, honest embrace of the gray, what part of your own story have you been trying to perfectly, rigidly define that might actually be much more beautiful if you just let it live in the shadows?
If you stop trying to present the world with a perfect, high-definition X-ray of your life, and instead allowed yourself to be the abstract painter, capturing the feeling of the wild roses.
It changes everything when you realize the X-ray machine was never designed to capture the soul anyway. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Today, as you go out into the world, pay attention to the words you use. Notice the gaps. Embrace the betrayals of language. And remember, you don't just have to accept the world as it is handed to you. You have the power to translate it anew.